When it comes to breaking Portal 2, many will look towards the mind-boggling routes found in the game's speedrun. But if you want to see the game pushed to its absolute limits, look no further than the Least Portals challenge runs. Throughout the last decade, an extremely dedicated group of runners have found some of the most absurd glitches and techniques, all with the ultimate goal of beating Portal 2 without portals. Recently, after nearly 8 years of theory crafting, one particular chamber finally saw its portal count drop to 0. Let's take a look at how Trust Fling was beaten completely without the portal gun. Trust Fling is the 6th map in Chapter 2, and it follows the aptly named Catapult intro, where the player is introduced to the aerial faith plates. Trust Fling continues to use these faith plates by putting a handful of them in a massive pit of goo. To complete the chamber, you must trust that these aerial faith plates will fling you to your destination. You ride on 3 faith plates, then use portals to fling to the next, which lands you on a platform with a button. Pressing the button activates the dropper at the start of the chamber, which on first press dispenses a ton of junk, and on subsequent presses dispenses a cube. You can use portals to drop the cube onto the button, which opens the ending door and lets you complete the level. As you can see, Trust Fling is one of the simpler Portal 2 chambers, so pretty quickly, runners were able to find a 2-portal route for the chamber. Instead of flinging out of the slanted portal surfaces as intended, you can fling right over the button. If you're standing in the button area, the game creates a platform so that you don't get soft-locked. Using this, you can easily jump onto the faith plate that you would normally have to fling onto. Then, you can just press the button and push against the door. The first piece of junk out of the dropper is a sphere, which weighs down buttons, so after it flings through your portal and onto the button, you can get to the flags and finish the chamber in just 2 portals. This 2-portal solution to Trust Fling is pretty simple, and doesn't really require any glitches or even speedrun techniques. But this seemed like it would be the lowest portal count for the chamber. 1 portal, of course, wouldn't be useful, because you'd need to shoot another portal for it to actually open. So the only possible improvement would be a 0-portal completion. And how would you even start to beat this chamber without portals? For most Least Portal solutions, physics objects are key in finding portal-saving exploits, as there are an abundance of source engine glitches with physics objects. But in Trust Fling, the only physics objects are either in the Ratman Den or released from the dropper after hitting the button. Both of these seemed impossible to reach without portals. So the idea of a 0-portals Trust Fling run seemed impossible, and many accepted that 2 portals was probably the lowest the chamber could go. Well, that was until Krzyhau looked at the chamber. In 2016, Portal 2's best router was able to find something that completely changed Trust Fling. This fling lets you get onto the ending platform without using any portals. You need to airstrafe in just the right way in order to slope off of the first angled panel, but if you do, you can maintain a good amount of speed and strafe into the second angled panel. Here, we abuse something called scripted momentum. Most flings in the game have a trigger that automatically corrects your velocity when doing flings, so that way, the desired outcome of a momentum puzzle always occurs. So every time you do a fling in Portal 2, just remember that reality is a lie and the outcome was predetermined. By approaching this slanted panel with a fair amount of speed in the right direction, the game gets tricked into activating that consistent fling speed, so it redirects our path and shoots us directly onto the faith plate. This is super cool, but unfortunately, it doesn't make 0 portals outright possible. Once on the platform, hitting the button just spawns a ton of junk that slams into the other side of the chamber. There's no way to actually grab any of the objects from up here. Krzyhau theorized that if you could possibly make this jump from the platform to the faith plate, 0 portals would be possible by grabbing the cube and doing the weird fling again. You could then land on the edge of the other faith plate and line up the cube so you bounce off of it to change your fling path to the button. This was a promising theory, but this bunny hop from the platform to the faith plate is not possible. It looks sort of close, but Portal 2 really doesn't let you airstrafe diagonally, and since this is a diagonal jump, you just can't build up the speed for it. Regardless, This scripted momentum fling was a huge find. You could get to the platform in 0 portals, and surely there's something more we can do here. Well, for humans, it was looking like tough luck. But about 2 years later, when the Portal 2 community started to develop proper task tools, we were able to test the extremes of our theories. And it turns out, the task can airstrafe really well. While it's impossible to make this diagonal jump, the task can bunny hop across this massive gap, which, combined with a precise uncrouch to cancel your horizontal momentum, and some more superhuman strafing, you can snatch the sphere out of the air and land back on the faith plate. And at the end of it all, a half-court shot onto the button lets you complete the chamber in 0 portals. So there you have it. If you were a robot, you could beat Trust Fling without the portal gun. This was an incredible feat, but a little unfulfilling. As for humans, it's impossible to build up enough speed to clear this gap. Like, not even close. So while this task was celebrated, the search for a human-viable 0 portals route was still underway. The next possible theory came from the Ratman den present in the chamber, which you can enter in 0 portals by strafing the other way after sliding off of the panel. There are a handful of small props in this room, but unfortunately, all of the objects that you can pick up have no collision with the player, so it didn't seem very useful. Normally, you could object hop off of items, which could be helpful to clear large gaps, but since these props don't have collision, we'd have to get more creative. The most compelling theory involved using one of these objects to temporarily disable an aerial faith plate, as the faith plate has a small cooldown. If timed properly, an object could bounce off of the faith plate platform without getting flung, and hopefully land on the other faith plate. But this was most certainly not possible, or if it was, any variant of this strategy was far too hard. It seemed that it would take a miracle for Trust Fling 0 portals to be humanly possible. Thankfully, on November 7th, 2022, we witnessed a miracle. Nidboj shared this brief 7-second video of a turret colliding with the ball, bouncing off of the wall, and activating the scripted momentum. This unorthodox physics interaction was the key to a humanly possible Trust Fling 0 portal run. If the junk happens to collide perfectly, you can get the turret on the platform, a full physics object that actually has player collision. The only problem is that this interaction is unbelievably rare. Nidboj had made a quick save right before hitting the button, and then used a script that would activate the dropper for him. In order to get this once, his script ran for 115 hours, on 2 different instances of the game, until it eventually detected that the turret hit the scripted momentum, flinging it to the platform. Using this, Nidboj created a segmented 0 portals completion of Trust Fling. Once you got the turret, you could do a mid-air hop off of the turret to land on the edge of the faith plate, grab the cube, and then bounce off of the cube to get to the button. So Trust Fling 0 portals was humanly possible, and Nidboj proved it with this segmented run. However, our story still isn't done here, as segmented runs don't count for the least portal leaderboards. Only runs completed through the game's challenge mode are accepted. In challenge mode, you have to complete the level single segment without saving and loading. So while the segmented run was universally celebrated in the Portal 2 community, this still wasn't the end of Trust Fling 0 portals. To put this chamber truly to rest, someone would have to pull this off in challenge mode. But the odds of someone performing this route single segment looked incredibly slim. You would have to grind for hundreds of hours to even get the turret once. And unlike a segmented run, where you can save right before pressing the button, in challenge mode, you would have to play the game for about 50 seconds until the turret makes contact with the panel. And since the junk only comes out on the first button press, upon failure, you would have to restart and do it all again. But even if you miraculously get the turret, the mid-air turret jump is quite hard, and you have to land on the edge of the platform. If you land in the goo, your run is over, and if you land on the faith plate itself, your run is basically over because the strafe is quite inconsistent from a random setup. The strat wasn't impossible by any means, but it could easily take tens of thousands of hours for a human to pull off this route in challenge mode. So Trust Fling entered a league of its own within the Least Portals community. It was the only chamber in the game that had an asterisk next to its Least Portals count, because 0 portals was proven to be humanly possible, but no one had completed it in challenge mode, and it stayed like this for a while. There were some murmurs of other routes, but nothing convincing. It took around a full year until Trust Fling would finally meet its match, as runners turned towards one of Portal 2's most broken glitches, the PPD, or the Player Physics Deformation glitch. Now this glitch is really confusing, so let's start with the TLDR. You can use a physics object to clip through certain thin walls. Now here's the long version, and don't worry, I won't be quizzing you on this. The player has 2 hitboxes, the main one for basic interactions, and the physics shadow hitbox for interacting with physics objects. Normally, the main hitbox controls the player's movement, while the physics shadow is just hanging there to allow physics objects to collide with us. However, as soon as we interact with a physics object, roles are reversed, and it's the physics shadow controlling the movement, while the main hitbox is teleported to it whenever possible. Under normal conditions, these hitboxes always overlap, but this can be changed. When 2 physics objects intersect, the game applies fixed angular velocity to both of them to resolve the intersection. Since the player's physics shadow is a physics object, we can cause it to rotate and, as a result, offset it from the main hitbox. This can be done by penetrating it into another physics object, like a turret, or with enough rotation, a door frame. Once the shadow hitbox has rotated a fair amount, we stand on a physics object to put our physics shadow in control of the movement. Since this hitbox is currently inside of a wall, the game will push it to the nearest open space, behind the wall, and then our main hitbox will teleport to this new position, successfully putting us on the other side of the wall. PPD can't be used to clip through walls everywhere, because the wall you want to clip through needs to be on the correct rotational axis in order for your shadow hitbox to rotate into it. This glitch was first found as early as 2016, but it wasn't used in Least Portals until 2021, which made an absurd 0 portals route possible in Neurotoxin Sabotage. PPD had been considered for Trust Fling, as the ending door is facing the right way for it, but it's unfortunately in the wrong direction. So if you did PPD normally, you would have to rotate your second hitbox a near 300 degrees, which was theoretically possible, but would require an ungodly amount of patience, among some other technical concerns. In 2024, a Least Portals runner named SuperAiderton decided to take a look at PPD in Trust Fling, specifically getting negative PPD, a harder variant of the glitch that gives the player negative rotation. And after a good amount of effort, SuperAiderton was able to find a consistent way to get negative rotation using the turret and the door frame. The biggest problem with these PPD routes is that when you perform them, you really have no idea whether or not it's working correctly, since the hitbox you're trying to rotate is invisible, and you have no way of viewing your hitbox's rotation, so it might take a while to successfully set up the clip. But as long as you or the turret don't fall off the platform, you could spend as long as you needed to set up the clip. So with the PPD, Trust Fling 0 portals was feasibly possible in challenge mode. If someone was crazy enough to grind the chamber for hours on end to get the exceedingly rare turret fling, you could use that turret to get PPD and clip through the ending door. In January of 2024, SuperAiderton set out to get a proper single-segment 0 portals run of Trust Fling in challenge mode. He had nearly perfected getting the PPD clip, so all he needed to do was get his hands on the turret. Throughout the month, SuperAiderton spent hours upon hours in Trust Fling, just doing the strafe, pressing the button, and hoping the turret would fall into the exact right place with the exact right speed. He was basically pressing this button like it was his 9-to-5 job, streaming almost every day, sometimes for up to 8 hours, doing the same monotonous task over and over again in hopes of getting this one rare result. Around this time, one runner named JP Smith ran some simulations and concluded that every time you hit the button, there's about a 1 in 30,000 chance that the turret hits the scripted momentum fling, which means that to get this in challenge mode, it would take, on average, 400 hours straight of playing Trust Fling, Thankfully for SuperAiderton, he found himself on the lower end of the bell curve, getting a turret after 7,327 attempts, or after around 120 hours of gameplay on the map. Setting up the PPD took quite a while, as he took just over 3 hours of calculated turret jumps and doorframe hugs. But SuperAiderton was able to clip through the door and beat Trust Fling in 0 portals. While this run was theorized as early as 2016, it took runners nearly 8 years of TASes, segmented runs, one of the game's most complicated glitches, and thousands of hours of dedication to make this run come to life. It might just look like pressing a button and messing around with a turret, but this is one of the most important achievements in Portal 2's history, as now, Trust Fling joins the many other Portal 2 chambers that can be beaten without the portal gun. Who knows which levels will be next? Thanks for watching.